The grand throne hall was suffocating quiet, packed with rows of silent, terrified nobles, generals, and court officials. Heavy velvet banners bearing the golden emblem of the fallen dynasty were being ripped down one by one, hitting the stone floor with that hollow thud. Vine stood at the foot of the raised dais, her chest heaving with shallow, ragged breaths. The cold water Jungkook had splashed over her face that morning was long dry, but the raw sting remained on her skin, a constant icy reminder of absolute powerlessness. Leona stood a few paces behind her, keeping her head bowed low, her hands trembling within her sleeves. High above them all, seated on the carved golden throne that had belonged to Vine's father for decades, sat Jungkook. He rested his chin on his knuckles, draped in black furs and armor, his dark gaze sweeping lazily over the court before fixing entirely on Vine. Bring out the prisoners, Jungkook commanded smoothly. The heavy iron door at the side of the hall swung open. The harsh metallic rattle of chains dragged out across the marble, echoing off the high stone arches with agonizing slowness. Vine heart shattered into thousand pieces. Guard dragged two weak, battered figures into the center of the hall. Her father, once a proud, unyielding monarch, was barefoot, dressed in filthy rags, his wrists and ankles bound in heavy rusted irons. Her mother could barely stand, clinging frantically to her husband's arm for support. The guards forced them to down onto their knees directly before the throne. He didn't hurry. He descended the long flight of marble stairs one slow, deliberate step at a time, the heavy thud of his leather boots sounding like a death march in the silent hall. The crowd parted in absolute terror as he reached the bottom, walking until he stood directly over the fallen king. Without a word, Jungkook unbuckled his long silk cape, tearing the heavy dark fabric from his shoulders and tossing it carelessly onto the dusty stone floor right at her father's knees. Clean my boots, Jungkook ordered. His voice moved, carrying to every corner of the room. Use your pride to wipe away the mud. The old king clenched his jaw, staring straight ahead at the marble, refusing to touch the cloth. Jungkook's boot lashing out was swift and brutal, striking the old man across the chest and sending him sprawling flat onto his back. No, stop, please, Vine screamed, straining against the guard holding her back, her tears spilling over in pure agony. Don't hurt him, please. Jungkook stepped forward, resting the heavy heel of his boot directly on her father's hand, pressing down slowly until the old king bit his lip to keep from screaming in front of his court. Jungkook, I beg you, Vine sobbed, completely abandoning every piece of her dignity before the entire kingdom. I will do whatever you want. I will obey you. Just leave him alone, please. Jungkook paused. He slowly lifted his boot off her father's hand, stepped closer to Vine, and grabbed her chin in a firm, inescapable grip. You will obey me, Jungkook whispered, his voice dangerously low. Then you can start proving that obedience in my bed tonight, earning every breath your father takes. Keep your hands off my daughter. Her father rose from the floor, struggling wildly against his heavy iron chains. Take my life, but don't you dare touch her. Before the old man could even gain his footing, Jungkook swung his leg back and kicked him brutally in the ribs. The old king collapsed back onto the stone with a sickening gasp, coughing helplessly as Vine shrieked in terror. Jungkook shoved Vine's face aside with utter disdain and turned his back on the broken man. Since the former king refuses to clean my boots, he needs a harsher lesson, Jungkook announced coldly, signaling the head guards. If he will not bow his head willingly, force it down. Give him 10 lashes across his back right here in front of his people. Heavy leather whips uncoiled with a sharp, terrifying crack against the floor. No, no, please, Vine cried out, with the guard still gripping her arm and keeping her from reaching her parents. She dropped frantically to her knees right at Jungkook's feet. Abandoning every last trace of her pride, she grabbed the hem of his dark tunic, her body shaking hysterically as tears flooded her face. Jungkook, I beg you, please, she sobbed, looking up at his cold, unreadable face. Punish me instead. Do whatever you want to me, but please stop them. Her desperate cries echoed off the high stone walls, but Jungkook didn't move an inch. He simply looked down at her shivering frame, completely unmoved, as the dark shadow of his reign cemented itself over the ruined kingdom. The first heavy blow tore through the silence of the hall. A sharp, sickening crack echoed off the high stone arches, followed immediately by her father's agonizing gasps. Vian's heart shattered completely. Make sure every noble in this room watches closely. Jungkook's voice rang out, cold, smooth, and entirely unbothered by the violence. Let them see what happens when a fallen king tries to hold on to a pride he no longer possesses. Stop, please stop it, Vine screamed, her voice tearing raw from her throat. She gripped the hem of Jungkook's tunic tighter, burying her face against his leather boots as she sobbed frantically at his feet. I'm begging you, Jungkook, please have mercy. Her mother's weak, frantic cries filled the space beside her father, her frail arm trying to reach through the iron chains to shield her husband's body. Leave him, take me instead. Please spare him, her mother wept, her voice trembling with pure agony as she was forced down onto the cold marble by the guards. Yet not a single person in the crowded hall moved. Nobles, journals, and court ministers stood frozen like statues, their eyes fixed on the floor, terrified that even a flinch would bring the whip down on their back. The fifth strike landed, and her father's body went completely limp against the stone, his breathing turning into shallow, unconscious wheezes. He fainted. Stop, he is unconscious, Vine shrieked, her voice breaking into hysterical gasps. Jungkook raised a single hand, and the guards instantly held their whips. Without a trace of emotion in his eyes, he looked down at the bleeding, unconscious man lying in his own blood. Drag them back to dungeons, Jungkook ordered flatly. The guards seized the heavy iron chains callously, dragging her mother and her unconscious father out of the hall, their dragging body leaving dark smears across the marble. Vine remained frozen on her knees, her eyes fixed blindly on the blood trailing across the stone. Her mind went completely blank, her breath catching bread in her throat as the raw horror of the sight drained every ounce of strength from her body. Silence settled back over the court, suffocating and absolute. Before Ryan could even process the horror, her harsh iron grip clamped around her upper arm. Jungkook yanked her upward off her knees in a one swift, ruthless movement. Ryan stumbled, her head spinning, her vision blurred with tears as he dragged her out of the throne hall, ignoring the hundred of silent eyes watching them. He pulled her relentlessly through the dark stone corridors, his long stride forcing her to practically run to keep from falling. The moment they crossed the threshold in the royal sanctum, Jungkook shoved her inside and slammed the heavy oak door shut. Ryan lost her footing, crashing onto stone floor near the foot of the bed. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him with a deafening thud. Ryan pushed herself up from the floor, her chest heaving, her vision blurred with hot, furious tears. The desperate girl who had begged on her knees in court vanished, replaced by a sudden violent surge of raw rage. You monster, Ryan screamed, her voice shaking with fury. How could you be so utterly heartless? Jungkook didn't look angry. He slowly unbuckled his heavy leather armor, tossing it onto the table with chilling composure. Heartless, Jungkook purred softly, turning his pitch black eyes toward her, a dark smirk curving his lip. I gave him a choice, Wine. He chose his useless pride over his own life, just like he chose his greed 20 years ago. I begged you, Wine cried out, stepping right into his space, her body trembling. I threw away my dignity. I swore I would obey you. And you still watch him bleed. Are you even human? Your dignity means nothing to me, Jungkook whispered, leaning down slightly, his dark gaze piercing right through her. And your tears won't save him. You think a few fake promises on your knees can wipe away a blood debt? You are living under my mercy now. The sooner you accept that your little loyal family is nothing more than dogs in my yard, the less blood I will have to spill. His mocking words set her blood on fire. Shut up, Vine shrieked, completely losing control. She hurled herself forward, raising her hands and striking him hard across the chest. She hit him again and again, her fist pounding against him with all the strength she had left. I hate you. I will kill you myself. I swear to God I will kill you. She sobbed wildly, striking his shoulder, her nails clawing at his dark clothes as she tried to tear him apart. Jungkook didn't even flinch. He stood like a solid stone wall, absorbing every desperate, frantic blow without moving an inch, watching her hysterical rage and chilling silent amusement. Is that all you have got? Jungkook taunted softly, his voice dropping into a low rumble right above her ear. Keep swinging, Wine. Every bruise you give me, your father will pay for twice. Wine's hand froze mid-air, a choked sob escaping her throat as his cruel words hit her like an icy slap. Her arm slowly collapsed back to her side, her chest rising and falling in shallow, terrified hitch. All of a sudden, the door swung open without warning, the sharp squeak of its hinges piercing the heavy silence inside the room. Leona stepped across the threshold, her hands trembling violently as she held a flickering lantern aloft, her face drained of all color. Leona stepped hesitantly into the room, her eyes wide as she tried to check on Ryan. One eye, Jungkook's body went firm. He turned slowly toward the doorway, his feature hardening into an expression of absolute lethal irritation. He loathed being barged in on, especially when his full focus was locked onto the woman standing before him. Jungkook snapped instantly. He turned toward the door, his eyes flashing with deadly explosive rage. Who allowed you to enter without my permission? Jungkook's voice boomed through the room, sharp enough to shake the stone walls. Leona gasped in terror, dropping straight onto her knees on the cold floor. My lord, forgive me. I only came to check if the princess were all right. Out, Jungkook cut her off, his dark pitch black eyes narrowing into a lethal glare. Before I have thrown you into the dungeons for your insolence. Outside the doorway, two heavily armed guards immediately stepped forward, grabbing Leona roughly by her arms and hauling her backward into the corridor. The heavy door slammed shut once more, the sound of the iron deadbolt sliding back onto place echoing through the room. Silence reclaimed the chamber, thick and suffocating. Jungkook turned his gaze back toward Vian. The cold, unbothered expression returned to his face, hiding whatever momentary anger he had felt. He slowly reached down to adjust the leather strap across his chest, his dark eye never leaving her trembling form. He took a slow, deliberate step back toward the threshold, stopping just before opening the door. He cast one final chilling look over his shoulder, a dark, dangerous playfulness lurking behind his gaze. Get some rest, he murmured, his voice smooth as silk yet laced with subtle malice. I will be expecting you to honor every single word you promised me. Vine's breath hitched, a sudden cold terror gripping her chest as his veiled threat hung heavily in the air. Satisfied with the silent panic lingering in her eyes, Jungkook turned without another word, unbolted the door, and stepped into the dark corridor, leaving her alone in the quiet shadows. Down in the subterranean guard hall, the air was freezing, thick with the damp smell of stone and burning oil. Torches flickered against the high, vaulted walls, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. Jungkook stood elevated on the small stone dais, his black cloak cooling around his boots. His face was entirely unreadable, a suffocating, heavy authority surrounding him that kept every shoulder in the hall standing at rigid attention. Heavy armor clanged against the stone floor as the court commander, who had restrained wine earlier, stepped into the center of the room. He walked up to the dais and bowed his head respectfully, completely unaware of the dark storm gathering over him. My lord, the officer spoke smoothly, keeping his posture rigid. You summoned me. Jungkook didn't answer right away. He measured the man with a steady, lethal gaze, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. The heavy pressure in the air made the commander's pulse race with sudden, unexplainable dread. In the throne hall, Jungkook began softly, his voice dangerously low, carrying over the quiet hall like a whisper of death. When she tried to reach for the prisoners, you laid your hands on her. The commander paled instantly, taking a quick, uneasy breath as he tried to defend his actions. My lord, she was attempting to break the guard line to reach her family. I had to hold her back. I was only enforcing authority to maintain order in the hall. Jungkook tilted his head slightly, his dark eyes completely void of mercy as he looked down at the officer. Do you truly believe your duty excuse such insolence? Jungkook asked coldly, his tone dripping with quiet dominance. No man under my rule touches what is mine. Not a nobleman, not a commander, and at least of all a mere shoulder. Realization crashed over the commander like a wave of ice. Panic seized his throat as he dropped heavily onto both knees, bowing his head until his forehead nearly touched the cold stone. Mercy, my lord, please forgive me, the commander begged, his voice trembling violently. I acted out of turn. I beg for your forgiveness. Jungkook didn't flinch at the desperate plea. Slowly, deliberately, he drew his blade. The sharp steel scraped against the leather sheath with a chilling metallic hiss. He stepped down off the dais, taking slow, deliberate step toward the kneeling man. Raise the hand, Jungkook commanded flatly, his shadow engulfing the officer completely. The one that dared to touch her. The commander's chest heaved in sheer horror, but bound by absolute fear and total obedience to his sovereign, he couldn't dare refuse. His arm shook violently as he slowly extended his right hand out into the open space between them. In one swift, blinding flash of dark steel, the heavy blade sliced down through the air. A sickening dull thwack echoed across the stone hall as flesh and bone were severed in a single huge strike. The severed hand hit the marble floor with a heavy thud, followed immediately by hot blood splattering across the cold stone. The commander let out a strangled, agonizing scream, clasping sideways and clutching his bleeding wrist in utter shock. Junko didn't even blink. He flicked the blood off his blade with a quick snap of his wrist and sheathed his weapon without a word. Clean this up, he ordered the standing guards coldly. Turning on his heel and walking out into the dark night, night fell over the castle like a suffocating sheet. Jungkook entered his private chamber, the heavy door closing behind him with a quiet, deliberate sound that sank into the room's silence. The grand space was dark, lit only by the faint crimson glow of the dying fireplace embers. His dark eyes swept across the room, expecting to find her awake, sitting terrified in a corner or glaring at him with that raw hatred. Instant, she was fast asleep. Mine lay curled on her side in the middle of his massive bed, the small frame almost lost beneath the heavy dark blankets. Her breathing was soft and steady, a dark contrast to the chaotic terror of the day. The tear stain on her pale cheek had dried, leaving faint traces against her skin, and her dark hair was scattered. Jungkook stood motionless near the entrance, his dark eyes anchored to her sleeping face. He stood there for a very long moment, simply staring at her. A quite heavy thought crossed his mind as he watched the soft rise and fall of her chest. If there was no dark revenge between them, if the blood debt of their families hadn't forced him to become the ruthless monster, things would have been so different. He would have treated her so differently. Slowly, deliberately, he unbuckled his heavy leather belt and let his sword clatter softly onto the table. He shed his dark cloak, taking slow, silent step across the cold stone until he reached. He stood over her for a long moment, cowering in the shadow, staring down at her face before slowly sitting at the edge of the bed. Jungkook leaned down slowly, hovering over her small frame until his broad shadow completely swallowed her in the dim firelight. His dark, unblinking eyes anchored to her sleeping face, tracing the soft contour of her forehead down to her delicate nose. Reaching out his warm, callous knuckle gently brushed a few stray strands of hair away from her cheek, tucking them tenderly behind her ear. His touch was impossibly soft, a startling contrast to the cold violence his hand inflicted only hours before. His gaze dropped to her lips. They were soft, slightly parted, releasing small warm puffs of air that brushed against his own skin. A sharp phantom memory flashed through his mind. Their wedding day. He remembered the way he had seized the moment at the altar, the kiss far rougher than anything a wedding should have held, driven not by tenderness but by the bitterness and revenge burning inside him. The urge to taste her again surged through his veins, dark, heavy, and irresistibly tempting. For a fleeting second, the suffocating weight of his blood feud, his ruthless drive for vengeance, and the endless hatred toward her family simply evaporated. There were only her, the quiet room, and the agonizing magnetic pull drawing him downward. Slowly, deliberately, Junko closed the remaining distance between them. His lips met her in a kiss that was shockingly gentle. It was a soft, lingering brush of warmth. He stayed there, drinking in her sweetness as their warm breath mingled together in the quiet shadows. Meanwhile, stirred, the faint pressure against her mouth pulled her out of the depths of sleep. Her eyelashes fluttered as her vision cleared. The sight of his towering silhouette hovering directly over her shattered her peaceful slumber into raw panic. She gasped, her eyes widening in the sudden horror. Instinct took over. Wine slammed her palm against his broad chest, shoving him away with every ounce of strength she possessed. Jungkook didn't lose his balance, but he allowed himself to retreat slightly, leaning back just enough to look down at her. The tender softness that has relaxed his features instantly vanished, replaced by an unreadable lethal stillness. What are you doing? Vine gasped, her voice trembling violently as she stumbled backward against the carved wooden headboard. She pulled the heavy dark blanket up to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Stay away from me, don't touch me. Stay away from you, Jungkook asked softly, his voice carrying a dangerous smooth edge that sent a chill straight down her spine. He slowly rose to his knees, crawling over the mattress toward her like a predator cornering its prey. Did you forget where you are, Ryan, or did you already forget the promise you made to save your father's life? I promised you my obedience, not this, Vine spat, her tear-filled eyes flashing with a sudden desperate surge of defiance. You humiliated my family, you destroyed everything I love. You're a monster. A monster, Jungkook purred, stopping just inches from her face. His dark eyes locked onto her, burning with an intense, suffocating heat that made the very air between them feel dangerously thin. Then stop expecting a monster to be gentle. Before she could scream, his hand shot out, his long fingers cupping her jaw in a firm, unyielding grip. He tilted her head up and slammed his mouth back down onto hers. This time, every trace of gentleness had completely evaporated. The kiss was harsh, possessive, and brutally intense. As her lips parted to gasp for air, he took immediate advantage, his tongue invading her mouth with a slick, dominating force that claimed every inch of her breath. He deepened the contact relentlessly, swirling against her in a slow, suffocating rhythm that asserted his total ownership over her body. The weight of his control consumed the room, leaving no room for her to breathe on her own. He pressed closer, using his broad frame to lock her against the dark wooden headboard, ensuring there was nowhere left for her to retreat. Van violently fought against his hold, her small hands slammed onto his broad shoulder, her fingers clutching frantically at the dark fabric of his tunic as she tried to shove his heavy weight off her. She twisted her neck, trying to break free from the intoxicating, terrifying invasion, but his grip on her jaw remained an unyielding vice, holding her captive beneath his mouth. He paid no heed to her frantic struggles. His tongue continued to command hers, taking control of every desperate sound that tried to escape her throat. Finally, with a harsh, lingering suck against her swollen bottom lip, Jungkook pulled back sharply, severing the deep kiss. Mine's chest heaved, her lips swollen and tingling from the intense, suffocating collision of their mouths. Hot, frustrated tears spilled over her lashes, tracing down her flushed cheeks as she tried desperately to pull her face from his iron grip. Stay away from me, Vine whispered, her voice cracking with raw, desperate fury. On our wedding night, you looked at me like I was nothing. You said I wasn't worthy of being touched. You said you wouldn't give me the mercy of a normal wedding. Jungkook didn't flinch. A slow, dark smirk curved his lip, cold, dangerous, and completely devoid of warmth. And you mistook that for a guarantee of safety, Jungkook murmured, his voice dropping into a sinister icy purr that cut through the silence. He leaned in until his lips hovered a fraction of an inch from hers, his pitch black eyes trapping her completely. I said touching you back then was too much mercy, he whispered, his dark gaze burning into hers with lethal intensity. I wanted your mind to rot in suffocating dread, wondering when I would finally claim my debt. But you shattered that dynamic the moment you traded your entire existence for your father's life. He leaned in closer, his hot breath fanning across her neck as his voice dropped into an impossibly dark low purr. Leaving you untouched was the torture for a proud princess, Jungkook whispered. Jungkook whispered, his dark smoke sharpening against her skin. Taking everything from you is the punishment for the captive. Vine's breath caught dead in her throat. The sheer weight of his logic crashed over her, turning her own reminder into the very trap that sealed her fate. Jungkook slowly raised his free hand, his dark eyes fixed on her face as his finger reached for the delicate top buttons of her dress. You belong to me, Vine, Jungkook said, his voice dropping into a dark final whisper against her skin. And tonight I take whatever I want.